Alrighty, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome. My name is Alexandria Scott. I'm gonna be your facilitator today. I'm a community engagement coordinator working for the Oregon Water Resources Department. Today, we're gonna talk to you about the Division 512 rules update. Those are the rules that govern groundwater use and allocation here for the Harney Basin. We're going to start off with an informational portion of this. So our staff will present. We will then have a Q&A portion. We'll take a break and then we'll open up the public hearing portion. For those of you who have not participated in a public hearing before, the Q&A is really a chance for you guys to get the questions answered that you need, because once the public hearing starts, we can't answer any questions. It is, you guys will give your public comment and we will receive it. So that Q&A portion is really your chance to dig in with us if you have those questions. As a couple reminders, we have been here since Monday. We will be here until tomorrow evening, having these informational sessions, but it is not your only opportunity to give public comment. We wanted to come out here during this time so that you guys have some time for information to resonate. If people want to meet with each other, come up with public comment. We will be coming back in August, and the information, locations, dates, times, everything is on the back of the frequently asked questions document. It's on the back side here. It has the contact information of where you send written comment, where you can email it. So before you leave today, grab a copy of this if you want. It's on our website if not. We will start with a round of introductions from Water Resources staff, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Seymour. I'm the Assistant Manager for Groundwater for the department. I'm based out of Pendleton, Oregon.
I'm Jason Street. I'm the East Region Manager for Water Resources, based out of Baker City.
Oh, hi all. My name is Kevin Mines. I'm the Water Policy Analyst / Rule Coordinator for the department.
Gabe Filler, Assistant Water Master here in the local office with the Valley.
Alrighty. So
Do you get
again,
much groundwater stuff? Are you learning or are you, what, or do you do it both or?
Yep, groundwater and surface water regulation.
all right, so one more ground rule before we go. We are going to save questions until the Q&A portion. So if you've got, I have note cards over there and pens if you want to write down your questions, or same with public comment. If you've got something you want to hold on to, save those, and then we'll get to you when we get to those portions of the meeting. Next slide, Kelly. Turn it over to our first presenter.
Thanks, Alexandria. It's a really quick presentation outline. First thing I'm going to talk about is why this rulemaking is needed. Then I'm going to let Jason talk about the strategy and the tools that we're proposing to implement in this rule update. And then we'll get into that Q&A section and let you all have the opportunity to ask us questions and try to clarify anything that we presented here and anything proposed in the rules. And then we'll move on to that next phase of the meeting where we go into public hearing. So if we go to the next slide, why the rulemaking is needed. So back in 2016, the department initiated a rulemaking, a similar update to these rules, designated the Greater Harney Valley groundwater area of concern as a restrictively classified area to prevent new groundwater rights from being issued. That was in response to complaints in the basin about declining groundwater levels, and the department had identified that groundwater levels were declining throughout parts of the Harney Basin here. And so as part of that rulemaking update, we also entered into a collaborative study with the United States Geological Survey, the USGS, and began investigating and studying the groundwater system here out in the Harney Basin. If you go to the next slide, that study took about 6 years, and out of that came a number of reports and some key findings. And so I think a couple of the key findings here are that it was determined that the Harney Basin groundwater reservoir is one groundwater reservoir. It's one aquifer. And that even though that is one aquifer, the water exists within multiple geologic units. So you can, when I say geologic units, think rocks. So under the ground, different types of rock and different types of material result in different hydraulic properties. So how well the water moves is based on the types of rocks that exist under the ground. And so the water's behavior, so how fast it moves or how slow it moves, is dependent on that geology. And then the last thing I want to point out is that the rates and magnitudes of both recharge and discharge vary based on where you are in the basin. So it's not a uniform distribution of recharge, water coming into the groundwater system, and it's not a uniform distribution of discharge, water leaving that system. When we talk about discharge, I'm specifically talking about both pumping as well as natural discharge in the form of groundwater discharging to streams, springs, or to native vegetation, those groundwater dependent ecosystems, groundwater dependent plants that can actually tap into the groundwater and use groundwater. So here on the right, I have a map of the Harney Basin hydrologic boundary. And as I said, we determined that it's one groundwater reservoir for that entire area here. And this comes out of our groundwater study. So if we go to the next slide, and Alexandria does have some copies of the key takeaways from that study if you want a copy of it. So now I want to talk about the problem that is leading us to proposing this rules update and the tools we want to use. So statutorily, there's a number of reasons that the Water Resources Commission, the governing body for the department, can adopt and designate a critical groundwater area. And the first one is that if groundwaters have levels have declined excessively, and so declined excessively is defined as greater than 50 feet of total decline from highest known levels in wells. So there are wells in the basin that have declined more than 50 feet. The second one is if groundwater levels are excessively declining. And so that's a rate test. And that means excessively declining is defined as decline rates of at least 3 feet per year or at least 10 years. So there are wells in the basin that are declining at 3 feet or more per year and have been doing so for at least 10 years. And then the last criteria that we've met here in the Harney Basin is that the available groundwater supply is being or is about to be overdrawn. And the definition of overdrawn is it's a situation in which pumping exceeds recharge. So the amount of groundwater being pumped exceeds the amount of water coming back into the system within that portion of the groundwater reservoir. And so we'll get into each one of these in the next slides. So if we go to the next one, I want to talk about first declined excessively. So declined excessively again is greater than 50 feet of decline from highest known levels. So here we have a map of the Harney Basin. Well, the portion of the Harney Basin, you've got Burns and Hines up here, you got Mount Here Lake down here, and we've got a bunch of red dots on it. And those red dots represent wells where we have identified that greater than 50 feet of decline has occurred. And some of these wells, greater than 100 feet of decline has occurred from highest known levels. And I want to point out a couple of things. One, our water level record for wells is not complete. We don't have historic measurements for all wells in the basin, and we don't have current water level measurements for all wells in the basin. So these wells are the ones where we had data and were able to evaluate for this criteria. And we believe that if we had a complete water level record for all the wells in the basin, there would be many more wells on this map. So these wells are representative of the conditions within the basin. And the second thing I want to point out is that based on current decline trends, we believe more wells are going to cross this threshold within the next several years. So the groundwater level declines are continuing, and we'll continue to have more wells cross this threshold. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about excessively declining. So that's the rate test. And again, that's at least 3 feet per year of decline or at least 10 years. Again, we have a similar map. And here we have yellow dots showing the wells where we have sufficient data to be able to evaluate this and have identified where this threshold has been met. So again, our data is not comprehensive and complete for all wells. And so these were the wells where we were able to actually calculate the decline rates and identify where the threshold has been tripped. And again, based on the groundwater level trends, we expect more wells to reach this threshold in the next several years. So the problem isn't going away, it is continuing. We go to the next slide, I want to get into overdrawn. So as part of that groundwater study, the USGS and the WRD divided the basin into three key water budget regions for calculating recharge and discharge. And those are on this map here, and they're the colored areas. We've got a north, a west, and a south, and they basically follow three key drainages: the Sylvies, the Silver Creek, and the Donner and Blitzen. And then within that, they then divided it up into an uplands and a lowlands, and this yellow line designates that boundary between the uplands and the lowlands. So using this information from the study, we were able to, by water budget region, calculate whether or not we're overdrawn, so where pumping exceeds recharge. And so in that northern water budget region, this green area on the map, pumping exceeds recharge by about 2,700 acre feet per year, based on our estimates. And that is clearly overdrawn by definition. If pumping exceeds recharge. And so this first column is that pumping versus recharge. The second column is the difference between lowland recharge and authorized use. So in that northern water budget region, if all of the paper water were to be pumped, we'd be overdrawn by about 96,000 acre feet. So we're wildly out of balance from a paper water right perspective, but we're definitely overdrawn from a pumping perspective. In that southern region, recharge exceeds pumping by about 26,000 acre feet per year. So we're not overdrawn by definition there. And if you look at the difference between recharge and authorized use, recharge exceeds authorized use or paper water by about 10,000 acre feet as well. When we get down to the western region, the red area here, which is, you know, where we're standing today, recharge exceeds pumping by about 4,500 acre feet. But based on the authorized use, where if all the paper water were to be pumped, we'd be about 18,000 acre feet overdrawn. We believe that this portion of the basin is about to be overdrawn. And so we've crossed this threshold of overdrawn in both the northern region and the western region. And the last thing I want to point out on this information is that as part of the process of updating these rules, we were required to put a report together outlining all this information. That report's available on our website. It's there for you to read through, and it provides all of the data that we were using in order to make this determination. So all that's available on our website for you to read. And we are accepting public comment on that report as well through the end of the public comment period for these rules. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Jason for a couple minutes and let him talk about the strategies and tools we're trying to implement here in these proposed rules.
Right, thanks, Tim. So, as Tim said, you know, the department has a little bit of authority to implement some certain tools to try to improve the issue or help the problem. And so if you can go to the next slide, please. And some of those tools that the department has regulatory authority to do are these here. Start with the classification. So the classification strategy there is in order to protect recharge, the department can classify the type and quantity of use allowed. So that means that the department can determine what uses it can issue water rights for, what issue or what and how much water can be allocated to those uses. The second tool we have there is the critical groundwater area. The critical groundwater area, Tim's going to talk a little bit more detail about that. But what it does is it allows the department to take the existing use that's out there and actually implement controls on that use. So the department can reduce use through regulatory processes and actually dial back the existing use through that process. And then the third one I want to talk about here is the serious water management problem area. And what that does, it helps us achieve some better accountability across the basin, which, you know, I'll get into that later, but how it does that, but essentially allows the department to require measurement across the basin and reporting. So requires that every well can have a measuring device and then required to report that use annually to the department. But these are the regulatory tools that the department uses. There are other voluntary tools that are available too. One of those is voluntary agreements, where a group of landowners can get together, take what they're collectively entitled to and share it amongst each other. So, you know, it's sort of like a rotation agreement, if you happen to be familiar with that, where everybody takes what they're entitled to as a group and then folks use it. And as long as they don't exceed the total amount, then they're fine. The other thing we have going is, there's a voluntary conservation reserve enhancement program, in the basin that allows folks to essentially cancel their water right. In exchange for that, they get a payment from both the FSA and, Water Resources combined that will pay per acre for up to 15 years, after that enrollment. So next slide, please. So I'll talk just briefly about, well, I'll get into the classifications a little bit more here. Next slide. So the classification is within this boundary. This boundary goes up into Grant County, around Seneca, and then all the way south, down below the lakes there, and into Woodson Voltage area. Next slide. So what the classification does, as I said, it allows the department to determine what uses are allowed in the basin. And under the proposed classification that we have for the Harney Basin, we still will allow exempt uses. So things like, obviously house wells, livestock wells, and then also, you know, non-consumptive geothermal uses and heating houses with heated water. And those are still gonna be allowed, not touching any of that, but it also means no new groundwater rights will be issued. So any new consumptive uses like irrigation or industrial uses, commercial uses are likely not going to get a water right. If somebody was to apply for those. But again, does allow non-consumptive geothermal uses. Also does not affect transfers of existing rights. So if you have a field you want to move to another location, shouldn't really affect that. Be able to move water around, or if you want to move maybe from irrigation to commercial or vice versa, that's still allowed under this classification. And so now I'll turn it back over to Tim. We'll get a little deeper into their critical groundwater. We'll run that.
So as we're going through the critical groundwater area piece, I'm gonna try to track along with the actual rules here in your packet. So if you follow along with me there, I'm gonna try to hit the high points here. And try to explain exactly what the intent, the thought process was behind the rules as we go through it. So right out of the start, we've got some definitions, we define some terms we use, and we'll talk about some of these key terms as we go through the different processes and how we're using those terms. So that's Rule 10. As you go to Rule 20, that's where we define administrative boundaries, and those administrative boundaries can be found in this map packet that's included with the proposed rules. So you can take a look at the individual maps there and exhibits. Rule 30 is classifications. So that's what Jason just talked about, restricting new uses and preventing new groundwater rights from being issued and really protecting that recharge. And then Rule 41, we get to the Harney Basin critical groundwater area portion, and that's where we're gonna dive in here. So to start with, on the next slide, Kelly, we'll talk about the goal first. So we outlined the goal for the critical groundwater area. Our intent is to stabilize groundwater levels within 30 years. So we worked with a rulemaking advisory committee on these rules over the past 2 years. That committee was made up of 32 individuals, different stakeholders from inside and outside the basin. What we really heard is that it took time to get into this problem, and we should take time to get out of this problem. And so having an adjustment period and moving in a concerted fashion, but also in a, you know, a slow and steady fashion is important. And so we are proposing to stabilize levels in 30 years. In the rules, the goal, the term we use for the goal is the target water level trend. And that target water level trend is basically measured as zero decline over a 6-year period. That's what we're proposing. So over a 6-year period, groundwater levels can go up or down, but over the whole, there should be zero decline. And that would be achieving stable water levels here for the basin. So that's the goal, and that's there in that Rule 41. Another aspect of Rule 41 talks about review of the rules. So if we go to the next slide there, Kelly. We're required by statute to review these rules every 3 years because they're proposing to restrict groundwater use. And then we're also required by statute to review these rules or to review the conditions within the basin that led to designation once every 10 years. And so we specifically call out that we're going to do that. And then we propose a process by which we'll present that review. So first off, we'll present that review at a meeting here in the basin where public comment will be accepted, both verbally and written. And then the department will take that comment, summarize it, and present it at a commission meeting. And again, that Water Resources Commission is the governing body for the department. It's made up of 7 individuals from across the state of Oregon. And we'll summarize those public comments to the commission. We'll present our review. And then that commission meeting will also allow for public comment. So as a individual in the basin, you could come to the public meeting here in the basin, provide public comment, which would then get presented to the commission, or you could go directly to the commission and provide public comment, or you could do both. So that's the intent for review. And then the last key portion of section or Rule 41, Kelly, if we go to the next slide, is dividing the critical groundwater area into 7 sub areas. And again, those sub areas are shown in the exhibit map packet, and I've got them here on the screen. Couple key reasons for dividing the basin into sub areas is really for administration of these rules and targeting reductions to areas of more severe decline. So it really allows us to target that regulation without having to regulate broadly across, a very large area. And so as we were dividing or proposing to divide the basin up into sub areas, department staff considered a number of factors. The first one was water level trends in wells. So what wells are tracking together, have similar water levels, similar behaviors. The next thing we looked at was hydraulic gradient, which is the driving force of groundwater flow. So how is groundwater moving throughout the basin? We looked at that. And then we also looked at the geologic materials, so the subsurface, right? What rocks and what types of rocks and how permeable are they under the ground? And how does that affect groundwater flow? And those were the real scientific criteria. Last one we added on at the behest of the RAC was we looked at NDVI data, so essentially greenness data. How green is the landscape? And what that allowed us to see was the extent to which surface water makes it across the basin. And so we used that as another criteria, and that really helped define this boundary here in between the Silvies and Northeast Crane. We use that primarily there. And then we also looked at, I call them administrative criteria. One thing we heard from the RAC was that more boundaries are likely to result in more conflict between users. So we had initially proposed 15 sub areas. We scaled that back to 7 after hearing that feedback. Another thing we heard was that having larger sub areas would allow for larger pools of users to collaborate together on voluntary action. So a bigger pool allows for more opportunity for collaboration and voluntary action, as opposed to having to do regulatory action. And we fully support that. And then a last one for us was really complexity. So more sub areas, more boundaries, more complexity, more opportunity for confusion amongst users. And so again, we dialed it back to this 7 sub area approach here. So if we go to the next rule, I want to start talking about how we actually are proposing to reduce use. So these rules lay out a process by which we identify use and then reduce it. I can't tell you today what the priority date cut line is going to be for who will be regulated off. Until these rules are adopted, we can't go through this process and actually identify that. So what we're looking for today is your thoughts about the process. Is it clear? Is it transparent? Does it make sense? That's what we're looking for. So as I lay this out, please understand that what we're talking about today is the process, not the cut line. So the PTW is a term that we're defining in rule. It's a statutory term. It's the permissible total withdrawal. And we're defining that as the annual volume of groundwater that the department has determined can achieve the target groundwater level trend or the goal by 2058 when following the schedule that we lay out in these rules. So essentially, permissible total withdrawal is a volume of water. And we'll define this volume of water for each sub area, and we present that in acre feet. And then this is laid out in Rule 50, the specific numbers are. And if we go to the next slide, I've got the figures here in a table. So in this table, we've got sub area, we've got the estimated 2018 pumpage. That number comes from the groundwater study. It's what was in the groundwater model that we used as part of this process. I've got a column here for the actual proposed PTW. So that's the minimum amount that would be allowed to be pumped within a sub area. And then I compare the 2 columns with a difference column here. So there's a percentage difference and you can see the amount of reduction. Couple key points, PTW, the department in working with the RAC and considering a number of different options, we actually wrote some software to interact with the model that was published by the USGS as part of the groundwater study. And we used that model and that software to identify, using the constraints that we defined, how long it would take to stabilize groundwater levels, a timeline for reductions, and our sub-area boundaries. What's the maximum amount that could be pumped and achieve that goal with given all those constraints? And so these PTW values reflect numbers that came out of that model to identify that pumpage. So as you can see here, it's about a 35% reduction overall. And here in Silver Creek, it's about a 28% reduction if PTW is fully implemented. And then I had another thought I was going to give you on that, and it just dropped out of my head. Well, let's go to the next slide, Kelly. We'll talk about how we get to those PTW numbers. So in order to determine what our current use is, so we can know how much has to actually be reduced, we're proposing a process by how we'll establish an initial allotment. And so this initial allotment is essentially what's actually being pumped in the basin. The intent is to provide water to as many users who have been beneficially using water as possible. We don't want to reward folks who have water rights, paper water rights, but haven't been using them. They haven't been using that water. We don't want to reward that paper by giving them wet water that would then essentially reward them for speculation. And so we're trying to minimize economic harm by allotting water to people who have actually invested in the infrastructure and are using water. And then this allotment will be in an order reducing the quantity of use under each water right. So each water right will receive an initial allotment, which says this is how much is allowed to be pumped under this water right. And this process is all laid out there in Rule 60. So now I want to talk about the three sort of different types of water right and how we're going to handle those. The first one, if we go to the next slide there, Kelly, are irrigation rights. So in Rule 60 and Section 2, we talk about how we're going to do this. So what we're proposing under these rules is to use a duty of 2.5 acre feet for both primary and supplemental groundwater rights. All but 5 rights in the basin have a duty of 3 acre feet. So for most groundwater rights, we would be proposing a reduction of 5 acre feet per acre. For those that don't know, the duty is the volume of water that can be applied per acre. So right out of the gate, that 2.5 acre feet is a reduction in use for all users. And again, the intent of that is to incentivize conservation as well as to attempt to make the water go as far as possible and reduce economic harm as much as possible. And then the second thing is we want to consider the historic beneficial use, and we're proposing to consider that historic beneficial use during the years 2020 through 2024. And so I've got a figure here. It's a 160 acre place of use. So the water right says you can put water on this rectangle or square here, and that's 160 acres. But if we look at what's actually been used historically, there's 125 acres irrigated there under that pivot, and these corners are all brown. And so what we want to do is, instead of allotting this water right water for those brown corners, instead of using the 160 acres, what we're proposing is to use 125 acres times the 2.5 acre feet to get to the total volume of water that would be allowed to be pumped under that water right. So this would be the initial allotment in this example, 312.5 acre feet to be used on that place of use. So that's what we're proposing for irrigation rights. In the next slide, we'll talk about municipal rights. So municipal and quasi-municipal rights, the two main municipalities that fall into this category of Burns and Hines. And what we're proposing is to allot 110% of their maximum single year's use in that same 5-year period from 2020 to 2024. So here I've got a figure of the reported water use from the city of Burns by years 2020 through 2024. In 2020, Burns used 1,250 acre feet of water. That's what they reported to us. So what we're proposing is to give them that 1,250 acre feet plus 10%, getting them to a total of 1,375 acre feet. We're also proposing to reevaluate their use every 6 years during our adaptive management checkpoints and adjust their water use to 110% of the previous 6 years' use. So as they use water, if the city is growing, they can grow up to 10% over a 6-year period in water use. If they're actually declining in use, then their use would decline and go to 110% of whatever their maximum use was over that 6-year period. And the intent here is to, again, provide the city with water for its people, but also to make as much water available to other water users within the area as possible. And so that's how we're proposing municipal and quasi-municipal rights be treated. And then on the last slide here related to initial allotment, I'm going to talk about all of the rights. And when you think about all of the rights, you can think commercial, industrial manufacturing, wildlife, pond or reservoir maintenance. It's that broad category of other rights. And I think there's about 40 of them here in the basin that we'll have to address. And they're not as straightforward to deal with as irrigation or municipal. And so what we're laying out here are considerations in the rules that we can use to try to identify that historic beneficial use and allot water to them. And so what we're going to consider are the limits of the groundwater right. So what does the paper say they can actually pump? The historic beneficial use. So if they have water use reporting records, they have an ability to show us how much water they've been using annually, we'll consider that. We'll look at whether or not water is physically capable of being pumped and put to use. So do they have water use infrastructure? Do they have a pump in their well? Have they been using water? We'll use that to determine this initial allotment. And then we're giving ourselves some broad latitude to use any other factors that we deem necessary in order to determine that historic beneficial use. So we're certain we can't think of every possible way in which we could need to, or possible piece of data we'd need to look at in order to determine that initial allotment. And so we're giving ourselves some broad latitude to deal with those specific rights this way. We go to the next slide. Now I want to get into, we figured out what current use is. How do we figure out what actually needs to be reduced? Well, we take that initial allotment, which is essentially current use, and we subtract the PTW, and that gives us that volume of water that needs to be reduced. So now we need to schedule those reductions. And we've said that we're going to schedule reductions over a 24-year period with the intent of achieving our goal in 30 years. And so the rules in Rule 70 specifically calls out that junior rights will be curtailed first. And that's following the doctrine of prior appropriation. The second thing it calls out is that the regulatory orders will not be enforced until after the contested case process is complete. So what we're talking about today are the rules. The rules lay out the process by which we determine the regulatory orders. The contested case is an opportunity following draft regulatory orders being sent out for the department to go before an administrative law judge and lay out the case or why the critical area is needed, why these orders are needed, and then also for the groundwater right holders to present their case before that same judge and contest any orders that they feel should be contested. And so that process has to complete before the department can implement any regulatory orders. And we wanted to make that really clear, so we put it specifically in the rules here. So now we've got that volume to reduce. We know we're going to curtail junior rights first. Now let's talk about the schedule and how we lay that out. So here's a figure that I'm going to try to explain here and lay out how we're scheduling reductions. So a key point is that Weaver Springs is being treated differently. So there's one sub area that's treated differently from all the rest, and that's Weaver Springs. It's the area with the most severe declines, both in magnitude and rate. And for PTW was fixed at a 75% reduction. So we told the model specifically, don't optimize pumping within Weaver Springs. We want to cut Weaver Springs by 75%. So they're getting treated differently than everyone else in the basin. For scheduling reductions, they're also getting treated differently. So of that total 75% reduction, 75% of it is proposed to occur in 2028. The other 25% is proposed to occur in 2034. And they are not eligible for adaptive management. So Weaver Springs is being completely managed separately from the rest of the basin and the rest of the structures. When it comes to the schedule for reductions for everything else, we have a plan that involves essentially implementing curtailment in a phased fashion over 24 years with curtailment front loaded to the beginning. So trying to solve this problem as quickly as possible, but also allowing ourselves the opportunity to adaptively manage. And so the proposal here is that in 2028, which is when we're proposing to start, we would take that initial allotment amount, right? That's the full amount that's being pumped. And we would, of the total reduction, we would take 40% of it. So now the total amount of reduction is 40% of the total quantity that's eventually going to be reduced under this schedule. We then wait 6 years. So there's some certainty for folks. If you weren't regulated off in 2028, you can know that you won't be regulated off until 2034 at the soonest. And so in 2034, we're proposing that we would then add an additional 30% of curtailment. So now of the total curtailment, we'll have implemented 70% in 2034. Again, another 6-year period in which there's some certainty for users who are pumping water to know that they're not going to get regulated until at least 2040. And then it's 15% in 2040, 10% in 2046, and 5% in 2052, taking us to the total amount of reduction. Now, if you're a senior water right holder and you fall in this PTW portion of the figure, then the order you'll receive is an initial allotment and no regulation date. You won't be regulated off. You'll be given your initial allotment and you'll know that you have certainty to be able to pump. If you're a junior water right, you fall in this total reduction period. The order you're gonna receive is your initial allotment and then an expected regulation date. So you'll have some understanding of when you're expected to be regulated off under this schedule. As we talked with the RAC, we heard loud and clear that the department should adaptively manage. And so as we go through this process and the schedule for reductions, we have built into the rules a process for adaptive management. And the purpose of this is to make changes in the basin, reduce use, track what's actually happening with water levels, and then adjust based on that measured data and that measured progress. This is the first time the department will have ever implemented an adaptive management plan. There's 7 critical groundwater areas in the state. None of them have adaptive management built in. This is the first time we're doing it. And we think we've built a robust process that has the opportunity to be really beneficial for this basin. But we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. If you have ways of making it better, we'd absolutely love to hear. So in the adaptive management plan, which is Rule 80, the first step is that before we implement any reductions, we're going to evaluate groundwater levels in 2027. And so the purpose of this is we heard from members of the RAC, some members of the RAC, that there should be the opportunity for users to take action now, voluntarily make changes, and if they are able to do that, prevent regulatory curtailment from occurring within their area. So if when we look at groundwater levels in 2027, if the groundwater level for that sub area is at or above 2022 levels, and the target water level trend is 0 decline, so the rate of decline in that area is not declining, so it's essentially stable, then we'll delay reductions from 2028 to 2034, and we'll reevaluate based on our adaptive management plan in the future. Otherwise, if those two criteria aren't met, we'll adhere to the reduction schedule and we'll implement that round of curtailment in 2028. This also allows us to see what the changes in upland recharge look like after these couple rounds of big fires, as well as, a couple of really good water years. How are water levels changing based on that as well? Another point that we call out here, and that I want to make really clear, is that the department is proposing to give itself authority to measure any well on a water right needed to implement this plan. And that's to ensure that data is available. So our data is really important to this process. If we don't have good water level data, we're not going to be able to adaptively manage effectively and understand what's going on within each sub area's portion of the groundwater reservoir. And so the department currently maintains about 100 wells in its observation well network that are measured quarterly. And we'll continue to measure those. There are most permits issued after 1990 have what's called a static water level measurement requirement in them. And so those water rights are required to measure the static water level of their wells in March and report those to the department. So we intend to continue to enforce on that requirement and make sure that we're getting that water level data. In the case of regulatory curtailment, junior water rights being regulated off, we believe that it's unlikely that water users are going to continue to pay for those static water level measurements and submit them to the department when they're not getting to use water under that water right. And so we want the ability to go out and continue to measure those wells and continue to include that data in our adaptive management plan. So that's the reason for that specific authority that we're giving ourselves. And then if we go to the next slide, Kelly, I want to talk about what will happen during the adaptive management checkpoints throughout the process. So after we've implemented that first round of reductions in 2028, we'll then have checkpoints each year before the next scheduled reduction. And that's so that we have time to process water level data, analyze it, and make adaptive changes and make that announcement in time for irrigators specifically to be able to make decisions about crops. The last thing we want to do is have farmers planting a crop and then being regulated off and having all of that investment wasted. So the process here is that we'll evaluate water level, the median water level for each sub area, and then we'll compare that median water level with the modeled trajectories. So we modeled out what the projected water levels will be for each sub area. And you can see the one for Silver Creek, it's in exhibit 14. It's near the back of the map packet. You can see what the projected water level is, and that dark blue line is the projected median water level. So we'll compare the actual measured median water level with the modeled median water level. And if water levels are on track, so they're trending with what we projected, then we're not gonna make any adjustments to the schedule because water levels are responding the way we anticipated. If water levels are higher than expected, then based on some thresholds that you can look at there in Rule 80, we can implement fewer reductions. So we could actually implement up to half or no curtailment if water levels are tracking higher than expected. If water levels are lower than expected, we can implement accelerated reductions. So we can actually increase reductions by half again or double. So 50% more or 100% more. And then after we've done all this calculation and figured out what the proposed adaptive changes are, we're proposing to meet in the basin to announce those changes and accept public comment on those changes. And again, this process is laid out there in Rule 80. And again, we're looking for feedback on all these rules, and I'd love to hear feedback on that adaptive management button. And then the last slide here related to critical groundwater area management is now we need to evaluate success, right? So we've adaptively managed for 30 years. Now let's check, did we actually succeed in meeting our goals? So no sooner than 2058 is what's proposed in the rules. We'll evaluate water level trends and test if the target water level trend is achieved. So have we met our goal? And depending on the results, we'll take different actions. So the rules specifically call out to give some certainty to users in the basin that if we're unsuccessful, then pumping is greater than PTW. So we haven't implemented all of the curtailment. We'll implement the remaining reductions necessary for that sub area in order to achieve stable water levels. If we're unsuccessful, so water levels are still declining, and pumping is equal to the PTW, so we've implemented all the curtailment and we haven't solved the problem, then the department and the commission will need to do rulemaking to adjust the PTW and reduce further. And last, if we're successful, so water levels have stabilized and pumping is greater than the PTW, so we haven't implemented all the curtailment, then the department is to do rulemaking to adjust the PTW up to the current pumpage levels in the basin. And that gives users then the certainty that those regulatory orders will be rescinded and they won't have to worry about, or they'll have some certainty around the water use they're authorized to do under these rules. And so that's how we evaluate for success. And that's the essentially last section of that Rule 80 adaptive management. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Jason, and I'm going to let him talk about that serious water management problem area.
Thanks, Tim. So as I mentioned, as part of those 3 tools early on in the presentation, serious water management problem area is the third one that touched on there. Next slide, please. So again, this is the map of the serious water management problem area. Looks familiar probably because it's the same boundary as the classification area that we showed earlier. Next slide. And so as I mentioned, there is a measurement device requirement under the serious water management problem area or SWMPA. And what we are proposing under these rules is that by March 2028, all groundwater right holders, well owners, well operators, so every well must install and maintain a totalizing flow meter. Then those flow meters then need to be installed, of course, to the manufacturer's specifications and must be maintained in good working order. And then the department needs to be able to access those measuring devices. I don't see that happening often, but occasionally the department may need to come out and do a check measurement on that measuring device, make sure things are working properly and everything's good to go. And then if for some reason somebody decides they don't want to install a flow meter, and we will go through a process, you know, through the department to try to work with the landowner on that. And if that fails, then we do have a regulatory or enforcement process that we follow. That could lead to, you know, the shut off of that well, or even some civil penalties in extreme cases. One thing I do want to mention here is the department does currently have funding for measuring devices, and they are currently, you know, willing to reimburse folks for up to 75% of both the measuring device and the installation. So typically what we'll see is folks will go out and get a quote, put in a measuring device, and then the department can, you fill out a pretty short form, and the department can reimburse you for 75% of all those costs. And if you're interested in that, you know, the water master's office has that information, it's talk with them. And we can get you going on that. I think so far I've approved in the last year, just off the top of my head, it's probably over $65,000 worth of measuring devices in this space in the last 12 months or so. Folks are taking advantage of that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a reporting requirement on these measuring devices, so users go out and every month and take a manual recording of what the total is on the total as in flow meter. And then those numbers are then need to be reported to the department by the end of the year. And then if for whatever reason, at some point, meter fails to operate, so maybe it's broken, maybe there's just a battery issue, disconnected, something happened. That once that is discovered by the landowner or water user, then within 48 hours, that needs to be reported to the water master's office. And then, you know, you can continue to use, once that's reported, for up to 60 days. While you're, you know, whatever it takes to get that meter fixed or replaced or repaired. Or maybe, you know, battery ordered, whatever it might be. And then after that 60 days, you know, then we would start, you know, getting a little concerned about the replacement of that meter, and may have to go through the enforcement process there. Then during that 60 days, while the meter isn't working, monthly measurement is still required, and there are some options in the rules that talk about what a replacement measurement might be, and typically what that is like a power meter reading. We can calculate approximately how much was power being read. So in the meantime, we can get those measurements, and those will be submittable. And then once that meter is repaired, within 48 hours, that also needs to be reported to the water master's office, so we know folks are good to go with the new meter. All right. And now, you know, that's the end of our presentation here. We're happy to take any questions.
Yeah, we could all the public comments.
Great. Okay, well, if anyone has any questions, feel free. Again, if you have a comment on the actual rules, content, process laid out, hold on to it for the public hearing. This is really meant for the questions for you guys.
Who, when, like, if you do a voluntary thing and you get it submitted, who says yay or nay to it?
Our commission would be the one that actually has the final word on that, so we would take that voluntary agreement proposal, bring it before the commission. And present it to the commission, and then they would make the final decision on whether or not that's accepted.
In that case, though, even if a voluntary agreement was made and not given to you guys or the commission, if the results were positive and the aquifer stabilized, doesn't the adaptive management, kind of work anyway to, cut back on, curtailments?
Well, in order to do a voluntary agreement, you know, in a voluntary agreement, you take the group of folks that are interested in that. They'll take that water that they're entitled to and use it amongst themselves how they choose. So if absent a voluntary agreement, we would just regulate by priority date all of those folks. And so that's kind of the difference between the two. But you're right, if the voluntary agreement doesn't work, then yeah, it would be in place in lieu of an order of the commission, which would rule over the orders that curtailment. If it was working.
What was your number on the curtailment out here? 28%?
We go to that slide. I don't want to miss it. Yeah. Silver Creek was 28%, and that's as compared to the estimated 2018 pumpage.
And so if you cut everybody a half acre foot right out the gate, then that's a 17% curtailment just on everybody, on the new, you issue a new water rate that says instead of 3, you get 2.5 acre feet. Is that the plan right now?
It's not a new water right, it's an order like essentially preventing you from using the full water right.
A modification too.
Yes, like it's an order restricting the use of that water right. So it doesn't actually reduce use, what it does is redistribute use, right?
Well, it reduces if you use 3.
Yeah, absolutely, but it doesn't reduce the overall use, it redistributes use. So if we have to take a 28% reduction in order to get there, yes, cutting everybody a half acre foot would reduce use about 17%. Yes, that your math checks out there just off the top of my head. But still, that's not the 28%, and there will be some juniors that would be regulated off there in that first round. But that pool of juniors is gonna be smaller than it would be if we were to not take that half acre foot cut. Does that's what I mean by redistributing.
But so is that half acre cut of foot built into this 28% already, or is that, okay, if it is truly 17%, then you're only declining 11% off of curtailment? Is
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
It's not.
Because
so you're gonna take the 2.5, reduce back to the 2.5, and then reduce another 28%? Is that
Yes.
the ultimate goal?
Yeah, because if you look at just Riley, there's 10,000 acres here. At 3 feet of water, that's 30,000 acre feet.
Yeah.
And you haven't showed us the amount you're gonna cut back, I think it's around 15,000.
28,
21 point,
no,
sorry, 15.2.
15,000 acre feet. So you're actually cutting us 50%, but then if you throw the double O area into it, we're probably more like 45, you're taking it down to about 65% reduction. That's what you're doing. That's what you're kind of, there's some stuff kind of left out there. Cause we actually pump about 30,000 acre feet in Riley, just Riley, not double O area, just Riley. There's 10,000 acres here. So we're allocated 3 feet of water. That's 30,000 acre feet.
Right,
So.
and what I'm showing here is what was estimated in the groundwater study
Estimated.
for 2018. Yep. And that's why we're proposing that initial allotment to get to the actual number, right? What's actually allowed to be pumped with an incentive for conservation by reducing the duty from 3 to 2.5. And then a schedule for reductions and that adaptive management piece. So that if water levels are trending better than expected, we don't have to implement the full proposed reduction.
So. Can you take? If we're saying we'll just use 10,000 acres. And if you give us the 2.5 for those acres that are actually were irrigated in 2018. Then your 21 number is low. You
Your
would have,
starting rate.
your
Yeah.
starting rate is low, so if you take of what we were actually by acres irrigating. That 15.2 reduces us down to 6,080 acres. So you're taking us from around that 10,000 down to 6,000. So that means you're actually reducing what we actually were irrigating in 2018 by 40%. And the 40% reduction is not, in my opinion, justified by your data. Your model runs show that in 7 years with no change to our pumping, that our water levels will drop 7 feet in 70 years, which calculates out to 0.1 feet a
So,
year.
so Larissa, you're
And
getting, you're getting
there's
into
also-
public comment here. So
Okay.
we're in Q and A. So if you've got a question,
So my
I'd love to hear your
question would
question.
be- My question would be, because of all that information, how are you justifying cutting us so much by 50%? How are you justifying that by so little of reduction a year by inches a year? How is that critical? It does not mean, can you tell me why are we critical? In Riley, in here
Yeah,
specifically.
so it goes back to that slide about being overdrawn or about to be overdrawn. And overdrawn is an incredibly serious situation. If you are pumping all of the recharge coming into the system, then there's no recharge, groundwater recharge for natural discharge, natural processes. Discharge to springs, discharge to streams, and discharge by consumptive uses by those native vegetations. So that's a very serious condition. And this Western water budget region, we're 4,500 acre feet a year away from the true, like the textbook definition of overdrawn. And we believe this is about to be overdrawn. And so this is a really serious situation. And as we've determined it through the groundwater study, groundwater is moving through this Western water budget region down towards that double O area. And it supports that spring discharge for surface water rights and for the Mount Hero Wildlife Refuge, which is a critical ecological feature for this basin as well. And so as pumping gets closer and closer to consuming all of the recharge, the amount of spring discharge there is projected to decrease. And water levels are also projected to continue to decline. And to address your comment about the 7 feet of decline over that period and that being inches per year, it doesn't work out as inches per year. What happens is declines are quick at the start and slow over time as the system equilibrates at the new level and as that natural discharge goes away. And so what happens is you get the declines at the start and the rest of it is paid for by natural processes. And the users that are hurt are those with water rights on those springs and the ecology down there. And so it's not, in my opinion, appropriate to say, like, to average that decline over that full period. You should look at how much decline is happening over that shorter term period to understand what that rate of decline is. And so if you look at the model trajectory specifically for Silver Creek, what's modeled to happen from 2028, even with the reductions, is another 1.5 foot of decline as we stabilize this area. So even with the reductions we're proposing, there's gonna be continued.
I don't
water
understand
level.
why you said you can stabilize this area.
We are stable.
We're stable. I'm gonna air right quick and say something. I've been here since 1995. I've recorded my wells every freaking year. And you know what? We've increased by 9 feet in that period of time. Lately, every one of our wells have showed no decline whatsoever. Not one bit. So I don't buy any of this, which you're doing. Because you're not, it's not legal, it just doesn't fit us at all. It fits everybody south, but you can't say that we're in that. I'm gonna say something right now, anyway.
So we're gonna have to have you hold it till the public comment. I know
Alright,
you,
I will.
I know you want to, but we're gonna have to have you hold it till the public.
Yeah, so-
public hearing.
What I would point you to is we have a water level trends analysis that was published on our website that you can take a look at. We did that using data through 2024. We also have an interactive map where you can see the water level data that was used in that water level trends analysis. And that water level trends analysis also includes all of the well logs, the wells that were used, with links to our online hydrographs for the data we have for each of those wells that was monitored. So. Larissa.
It's kind of along the same lines, so if we're above the 4,500 acre feet, by definition, we're not over allocated. But if, so the question would be, well, we have 13 dependents. So when you reduce Weaver by 14,400 acre feet, which is within our recharge area, we're now, now we are 18,900 acre feet above recharge. Our pumping is now below. You understand what I'm saying? So now that we've saved water in the Weaver, so now we are not over allocated or close to it, because in the USGS report, they said approximately the natural discharge to this basin was around 20. So we've saved 19 and our natural discharge is 20, so now we are at equilibrium. So how can we then still be in critical and be considered over allocated once Weaver has been taken down?
So what you're asking, so your question here, from my perspective, essentially asks, why don't you just deal with Weaver Springs and leave us alone? And leave us out of it?
Balance after you've done that.
And as we have gone through this process, we've heard a wide variety of views. And we've heard views that state we should treat the basin as a unit, as a community. Everyone should contribute to solving this problem because this problem does affect the entire basin. This is an area of recharge, like you talked about, to Weaver Springs. And what we showed in the model is that just reducing Weaver Springs does not stabilize groundwater levels across the Silver Creek area by itself. And what we're trying to do is achieve stable water levels across this basin so that pumping can be sustainable for the long term here in this basin. And that's what we're trying to address. And so you can, for the whole basin, so you can slice and dice the basin however you want and manipulate the numbers however we want. At the end of the day, what we're trying to get to are stable groundwater levels because we have these conditions that are unsustainable.
The Weaver Springs reduction will have as much or more impact at your springs at the Double O and the ecology at the refuge than anything will up
You're
here.
only 5 miles away, we're 20, like 18, 20 miles away from this. From just Riley,
We
not
have
those.
150-foot declines compared to our inches to feet declines, and we're that far away. And what we were told, and I don't understand, is that Weaver doesn't affect the springs that much, that we're more of an effect on it, is what they've been trying to put it on us. And our inches of decline aren't enough to put us in a critical, so they use the springs. But I have a, sorry, that was a comment, it was another question. So I have a question about the springs and specifically, what factors cause a spring to decline? Could you give us all the reasons that a spring decline?
I can't give you all the reasons. I'm not a hydrogeologist. But some of the key ones are, I mean, the most critical one is groundwater levels. And that hydraulic gradient driving water, groundwater flow to that spring discharge area. To no longer be discharging, right? So water levels fall below the point at which water is able to discharge out on the ground. Then you no longer have spring discharge. The other one is, if you no longer have a groundwater gradient, so a flow direction is moving water to that spring discharge area. You'd no longer have water flowing out in that spring. And so there's both a water level component and a water pressure component. So the pressure component, we often try to explain using like a garden hose, right? So when you turn on the tap in a garden hose and that hose is full of water, the water that comes out of that faucet doesn't immediately eject out the end of that hose, right? It's the pressure of that water pushing water through the system. So if you decrease the pressure higher up in the system, there's less flow going through that hose and you're gonna have less water come out at the end. And so the same thing happens with groundwater. If you decrease that gradient, decrease that pressure that is moving groundwater towards that spring area, towards, in this case here in this sub area, towards that Double O area, you will see less spring discharge because that water is not moving in that direction with the same amount of force.
But my question would be, well, doesn't Weaver change the gradient down there because it has changed the flow path? So therefore Weaver has affected that more than anything, because we have not changed the flow path. Our contour lines are still stable up here. The flow path to the springs has been changed by Weaver. And the gradient, so the gradient component is affected by Weaver, not us.
So
And the slight declines that we're creating is not that great of a pressure compared to the gradient change. So I would still say that Weaver has the bigger effect than on here. Would that be true that Weaver has changed the gradient at the springs because of the flow paths and its contour lines?
So there's another factor that adds complexity to the system, right? So you have a broad area of higher permeability material throughout the Silver Creek area. Weaver Springs is a very tight area of high permeability material surrounded by really low permeability material. And so water doesn't flow through that at anywhere near the speed as it moves through that higher permeability material. And so what happens is, over this broad area, we have broad, slower declines, right? So it's less of a rate. It's not the 4 or 5 feet of average decline that we're seeing in Weaver. But over this broad area, you're depleting a substantial volume of water. And that does, every inch of groundwater level decline results in less pressure towards those springs. Weaver Springs absolutely has changed the gradient in that area and is pulling water in. But the speed that it can pull water through that material is much, much slower than the water moving from this area towards that spring complex. And so that's the confounding factor to groundwater, is that you have this complexity of the underground materials affecting the behavior of that water. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I understand what you're saying, like Weaver, I understand that it's less permeable, the water can't go in, and I understand that. But why is there so many more contour lines on the outside of Weaver that are down in that spring area? We have one big contour line, and you get way past us down in Double O, and then there starts being drops in the contour lines closer down there, away from us. So Weaver, or whatever else is happening down there, is still causing the water to go down more than we are below us.
Yeah, and so when groundwater contour lines get closer together, it means that you have lower permeability material. So water moves slower. So as you draw it down, you have to draw the water down farther and farther in order to increase the speed at which water can move through that material. And so that allows for that deep cone of depression to form and water to still only move at the speed it can move through that material. And so that's just an indication of that really low permeability material through which water doesn't move as quickly as these other areas. So broad contours generally mean higher permeability material, the ability for groundwater to move through that material, spread out and mitigate the cones of depression caused by pumping wells. Really tight contours indicate, in Weaver Springs specifically, there's cones of depression, tight contours and circles. That indicates lower permeability, slower water movement around the outsides. I
So
think,
Tim, I want to do a time check. We have
Okay.
2 minutes.
okay,
So we'll get to your question and then we're gonna shut down the Q&A portion of this.
Are you sure?
we're legally required to start the public hearing on time. So,
Okay,
did you have a question? Go ahead. I don't know if the meeting happened.
no, I was just gonna make a quick comment. What else affects springs? Doesn't drought and precipitation affect springs?
Recharge absolutely
Yes.
affects springs.
And doesn't geology and fissures and fault lines affect springs?
Uh, absolutely, depending on their structures.
It's in the Brothers Fault Zone, the springs are, come out the Brothers Fault Zone.
So that's,
runs
sounds like
away.
you're headed towards the,
So my question is, how are that fault zone and the geology could be shifting underneath? How would that affect the slowing of the springs?
They come up depression shifting underneath, right? That was my,
And do you have information to back that up to say for sure that it's only pumping and it's not geology? And that it's not drought that happened 8,000 plus years ago? Maybe we had an extreme drought and that's the water that's supposed to be coming out. What information do you have to only put it on irrigators?
so I would refer you back to that USGS study and the information there. And I'm not gonna be able to answer any of those questions.
But they do have, can have a factor.
They absolutely can affect things, yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Quick one. Just want to make sure on that western region, it didn't trigger the 50-foot drop. And it
You can
didn't,
go back 2 slides.
and it didn't trigger the 3 feet a year for 10 years. Drop,
Correct, so we don't have any wells in the Silver Creek sub area, which is right over here.
and so that only thing that kind of puts it in as critical is, it looks like it will,
It's about to be overdrawn.
well,
Because of Weaver.
looks like you're expecting that it will. Yes, that's what we're saying.
Well, it's,
All right. We are gonna take a break and then we'll come back and do the public hearing.
thank you all for your questions, I really appreciate it.
Great.